I'm talking to my daughter, I also noticed that she does this really interesting thing. She talks about her life and she divides it in two periods. She says, my life in the pre-pandemic period and the post-pandemic period. Now, she's only 13 years old, right? So when we think about the pandemic, right, would you agree that it impacted all of our lives in so many different ways? Right? Think about how it impacted our mental health, right? Think about how we lost the sense of connection to each other. We lost our loved ones, right? The world was just never the same, right? I want to give you space to think about that for a second, because in many ways it was a traumatic time for all of us. And I think that in so many ways, the pandemic, the consequences were felt worldwide. So when I think about education, for example, I know that even in the most high-performing of countries, right, the most highly academic performing countries, they still were consequences, academically speaking. So we can't just say that, oh, you know, this happened just in the global south, for example. And so we know that, for example, in terms of mental health, anxiety and depression were very much rampant. I don't know about you, but I can speak from that personally. One study, for example, from China and France on university students during the pandemic showed that over 30% experienced depression and more than 40% struggled with anxiety. And then in the United States, in the state of South Carolina, in 2021, this study revealed that over 90% of teachers reported feeling very stressed, with nearly 90% expressing deep concerns about their students' mental health. So just sit with that. Those are some staggering numbers, right? But I don't want to spend too much time focusing on the pandemic, right? And because I'm not an expert on the pandemic, I just want to be clear. I haven't done the research on the pandemic. But I do want us to consider one question. What does education look like in a post-pandemic world, right? This is what I want us to consider today. And what can we do to ensure student success moving forward, okay? I strongly believe that the answer begins with compassion. Simple, right? Compassion, is that pretty simple? I also want you to think about, how do you define compassion? So when I think about what compassion means in terms of the school system, what I will tell you is that we must reimagine how we approach the education system, especially if we want to cultivate the next generation of global thinkers and leaders. This is not just about educating students today. This is about educating the people, the very people that will make the decisions in generations moving forward. So this is deep, y'all. This is not, you know, we have to be very thoughtful about this, and this is why I've been thinking about it personally, because it's very important. And we can't continue to tell educators and students, you know, oh, you know, the pandemic is over, you know, just get over it, move on, you know, just move on to another subject. It doesn't work that way, right? Because we've had some serious consequences. Noted and world-renowned educator Dr. Maya Angelou said, we all have the capacity to show compassion, especially in times of hardship. So I've been talking to you about compassion, and I've asked you to consider what compassion means for you. And so for me, let me tell you, as a political scientist, I like to define my concepts. To me, compassion is very basically seeing other people as human beings, whether they be teachers, students, seeing people as humans who have vulnerabilities, not judging them by the number of money, right, the number on their bank account or the communities in which they live, by offering them grace just because they are human, because often we forget about that, right? Can we just offer each other grace because we're human beings? Simple enough? Yes? No? I see some heads shaking. When I think about compassion, for example, in the ways that it's shown up in my life, I think about this one student of mine, Tamia, last semester, and she came up to me after class, and she was looking at me, and she said, you know, Dr. T, my students call me Dr. T because they can't say Terza or Lima-Neves, so I'm known as Dr. T on campus. She said, you know, Dr. T, are you okay? You know, you don't look like your happy, normal, bubbly self. And it made me emotional because she actually, she caught something. You know, I was having a hard week. And she said, you know, if you need to talk, or, you know, can I give you a hug? And she gave me a hug, you know, and that stayed with me. And what it got me to think about was the fact that she showed me the same compassion I showed her a few weeks back when she was having a hard time with a personal matter that I'm not going to tell you about. But that's the compassion she showed me, the same I showed her. I also think about Trevor, another student, who came up to me before class, different class, same semester, and was telling me that he was having a hard time, still struggling with mental health, had lost his place to live, and you know, was working to recoup some money, but had fallen behind on his assignments. So he asked me for some grace to finish his assignments, because if he didn't pass the classes, his classes, he would not get the scholarship that would keep him in school, right? So he needed some grace from me to pass his classes. And so who was I to say, no, you can't finish your assignments? So I said, of course, you know, let's work something out, email me. So in many ways, I could say that I offered Trevor the same compassion that my professors and my teachers and my dad and my aunts showed me while I was growing up, okay? And so we can see that in many ways, compassion is sort of like a chain reaction. You give it because you've had it, right? But you cannot give what you've never received, right? I want you to marinate, sit with that for a second. You cannot give what you have never received, right? So as an educator and as a human, I've been able to show compassion because I've been blessed to receive it, right? So I pass it on, because who am I to hold on to it? So just hold on for a second and imagine, going back to the education piece, what would happen if we prioritized mental health in the school systems as we do the subjects like science, math, right? What would happen? Wouldn't the world be a better place if we prioritized, if we centered mental health, right? So our education systems have been long focused on student success, and we're supposed to focus on student success. But my argument is basic and simple. In this post-pandemic time, student success must include mental health, because we're not living in the same period as before the pandemic. So we must focus on mental health, because our students, and if you're an educator in here, if you're a parent in here, you know that our mental health, right, has been impacted. Our students' mental health has been impacted. So we must pivot and consider mental health as we do other subjects, okay? And we must recognize that student success is directly linked with the success and the health of the teachers. When the teachers are healthy, and I mean both physically and mentally, when teachers show up to the classroom and they're mentally healthy, the students feel safe and they perform better. That's not just me talking, y'all. You can just Google it, do your research, you can figure it out. But don't worry, I've done it for you, which is why I'm saying it today. You know, and so and I'll repeat it, when your teacher is healthy, physically and mentally, the student feels safe in the classroom and performs better. That's not just me talking, okay? And for all of this needs to happen, for teachers to show up healthy and all of that, they need to feel valued and supported. So how do we support our teachers? How do teachers show up, right? How do we feel that we are supported as teachers? I think that, one, it depends on the context, right? We talk about local context. So we cannot apply what is happening in the United States or in Holland, for example, to what's happening in Cape Verde. So the easiest way to figure out what teachers need, you just ask them. You just ask them, okay? So that's one. Secondly, I think that if we're talking about more precise things, we can think about having mental health professionals in the school system for the teachers. Normally, we have them for students, right? But how about if we had mental health professionals for teachers? So if they're having a hard time with something, they can go and talk to someone right then and there, right? Another example could be having a physical safe space, a quiet space, so teachers can go and go decompress and go be quiet. But these are just a few of the examples that I'm talking about. And I know that they depend on resources, you know? Not every country, not every community, not every education system is created equal. And I know it takes resources and money, right? And, but to do all of that is not impossible. It may be difficult, but not impossible. But we have to be able to bet on education just a little bit more, okay? Closing this conversation a bit, I would have to say that in the post-pandemic period, two things must happen. Two things. One, teachers must recognize their own need for support. Oftentimes, teachers don't realize when they need support, when they need some help, right? Dealing with what's happening both at home and at school. Education is not necessarily an easy profession. We're dealing with students from different ages, different backgrounds, different academic abilities, so it is a stressful job. And so recognizing that what's happening outside of the school and what's happening inside of the school impacts you all the way is the first step that you need to take, okay? So recognizing that you also need help will benefit the student. Second, and I think a little bit more controversial, we need bold, courageous leaders at local and at the global levels who are not afraid to make decisions to benefit their school systems and to include mental health in this process. It takes courage, and it takes, you know, a fearlessness about policymakers to do so. So we need leaders that will stand up for teachers, okay? Not only for teachers, but for the students and for their communities, because we all need it. The world, we all need the help right now. Would you agree? Thank you. So some say, and I'm sure some of us in the audience are thinking it, there's some teachers, they're in it for the money. They don't care about the students, they're just here to collect the paycheck. And that might be true in some instances, right? That might be true. But I also know that from personal experience, I've met some really great, committed educators. I really have. And I think most of us are there for our students, okay? And we must include mental health in this new normal that we are now facing, okay? In order for us to move forward, okay? And a powerful starting point, I think, is showing compassion to each other. So I'm going back to the compassion piece, okay? Not only within our schools, but also in all of our communities. So remember when I asked you, now I'm going back, let's see how your memory works. Remember when I asked you to think about that special teacher in your life? Why were they so special, right? So I'm going to share mine with you. Her name is Marcelina Flor Lopes, known as Dona Shala. She was my first teacher right here in São Vicente. And she didn't only teach me how to read and write, we're still in touch till today, but she taught me that learning could be fun. I remember going to explicação, or tutoring, after school. She tutored so many of us. And after that, she would allow us to play in her backyard. We'd just stay there. And I made the best of friends that I still have until this day. So she showed us compassion. She made learning fun. And in many ways, she inspired me to become an educator, right? So think about that special teacher, that special educator in your life, and think about the compassion that she or he showed you. And I challenge you today to go out and share that same compassion that teacher, that educator showed you to your community, and demand that of your administrators and your teachers and your policymakers and your politicians. Thank you so much for listening.